Меня зовут Вера Белоус, я ответственный секретарь оргкомитета 100 плюс форум Раша и руководитель рабочей группы. До того, как я приглашу спикера в нашу аудиторию, я хочу вас кое о чем попросить. Мы пригласили Кристоса еще до того, как стало известно о проекте филармонии в широких кругах, и мы сами об этом не знали. Кристос был у нас в 2016 году, и кто присутствовал, вы помните, что была очень интересная лекция о мировой архитектуре и о невероятно интересных проектах бюро Zaha Hadid. Мы его приглашали сейчас именно с этим. И мы сегодня хотели бы в первую очередь поговорить об архитектуре и о том, как одно из величайших в мире архитектурных бюро работает. Я искренне надеюсь, что в этом зале собрались люди, которые заинтересованы в архитектуре и в том, чтобы узнать что-то новое. Пожалуйста, давайте не будем смущать спикера внезапными вопросами о филармонии и о том, как нам с ней быть дальше. Давайте, пожалуйста, проявим уважение, потому что он действительно волнуется из-за этого. И все-таки поговорим сегодня о мировой архитектуре в первую очередь. Надеюсь на ваше понимание и представляю Кристоса Пассаса, исполнительного директора бюро Zaha Hadid.
Good morning, everyone. It's a big crowd today, and it's a big honor to be here with you. I'm going to speak a little bit about cultural institutions and about the evolution of architecture through the years. So the presentation will start with some of our existing projects in Russia. First of all, we've been, as some of you may know, engaged in this country for the past 15 or so years. Zaha's history and story with your country has started many years before, when in fact she was a student. And when she visited the archives of a museum in Moscow and looked at some amazing constructivist designs, which were catalytic and influential, I must say, for our work. Maybe 100 years later, still they resonate in this way. So we try to be respectful to this history, and we also try to continue by engaging intellectually with this realm of work. My particular engagement with architecture in Russia was when we started the Dominion Tower around about the year 2006. At that point, when I visited first time, it was a very interesting and in many ways eye-opening experience, because Russia was in a transformative period at that time. And actually in 2015, when this project was finished, a lot of things had actually already changed. Most of the ideas about this particular building are looking back into those kind of constructivist, radical spaces where the idea of architecture as a gravity-less space becomes possible to begin to think about. And I think this kind of idea of humanity's adventures opening into space, but also understanding our relationship to the ground, the land, and also the way we produce ideas became rather important. At the same time, we had some private commissions, some luxury commissions, very unique and unusual, to design a house for a private client, which was in the forest around Barvicha. And the idea here was to give from those kind of private spaces an overview of the forest above the trees. This house, I think, opened a couple of years ago, and the client is now using it. It's, for us, more than the luxury and more than the kind of idea of the private house was this interest in a total piece of art, meaning a space of architecture where the inside and the outside are designed. All the elements of the architectural form are becoming to the service of usage and of the architectural experience. Later on, we participated in the project for the Techno Park in Skolkovo that was initiated by Sberbank. And this project really was a place where we could test some of our long-standing ideas about algorithmic design, how to use computer-generated, let's say, topographies to be able to test and assess how different densities of space and occupation of space can become tools for organizing this building. And in doing so, we came up with a solution that is rather unusual. It is a project that it's a very deep plan. So it has floor plates of about 130 meters by 270 meters. But in that unusual approach, there is the particular innovation that suddenly the office space becomes a playing field of engaging with people, with relationships. The office space is open and at the same time closed, so we create a kind of ecology of different degrees of privacy so that we can engage the 17,000 technologists that are going to be working in here. So we are essentially proposing a system of organization where the different teams, the task teams that are engaged on different projects can agglomerate in sizes of 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128 people dealing with problem solving on a daily basis. And of course, we all know from statistics that are done by relevant organizations that in fact 70% of the workforce in the world is disengaged from their work. They don't feel like they're going to a place where they're meant to be productive and creative. Some people are bored, some people don't care, and yet this is the place where we spend most of our adult life. So our approach was to work with the client to develop an agile working space, a flexible working space where whether you are in a mood where you want to work on your own one day or you want to work with 100 people, the building makes this possible. And by this way, it sends the message that creative work and engagement, every one of us has engagement in the workspace is important. And what companies are looking for is our creativity, is our problem solving, is the way we engage with our colleagues. And I'm happy to announce that this project is now on site. The client is now looking for a general contractor to come along and build it. There is a big hole in the ground waiting for the basement works to start. Yes, this is the kind of ecology that I was speaking about. So it's an open plan office, but also with those cubicles where people can work in relative acoustic or visual isolation. And essentially, it's this ecology of different types of spaces. So workers don't necessarily need to be fixed to a particular desk and a particular laptop, but they can take their machine with them and go sit with people who are doing relevant work and can collaborate with them and help them with their tasks. So these degrees of privacy that I was speaking about, whether enclosed or isolated spaces or open spaces to work with 100 people, are all within one, let's say, soup, an ecology of conditions. Such a building, of course, needs to be driven also by its possibility to navigate through the space. So The atrium is a pretty important feature, not only as a place where light comes in, and also a space where one can immediately get an overview of the space and see where the different things are happening, so that they can freely and without the need of signage move to the right places of the project. There is a big side around it, which we want to bring inside the building. So the glass facade is designed as a means for controlling the environment and temperature, of course, as usual, but at the same time to bring as much of the external environment inside. And in fact, in order to be able to let the light penetrate as deep inside the building, we even lifted up the floor slabs of each floor to 6.5 meters, about 50% more than what is usual, so that we can let the light come in, but also create a sense of space that is not compressed and very tight. Okay, moving on to the next project. This is our conceptual approach for the renovation of the residential quarters in Moscow. This is a rendering of the area of Kuzminki. And of course, you may have heard about this project because the government had announced that they wanted to investigate solutions produced by architects and other specialists, how to renovate the Khrushchevkas that were built in the 1950s and 60s, because that kind of residential stock was already becoming old, and a lot of people, as we know, are living in substandard conditions. So the idea was to relook at how this kind of zoning plan, the modernist zoning plan, is working, and to try to create a new sense of community. So some of the key aspects here were that buildings are laid in the landscape, but the spaces between them, the landscape spaces between them, have a lot of trees on one side, but they're mostly occupied by cars. People love the trees, but the public space between them is indeterminate, meaning nobody owns anything or nobody is responsible for anything. Therefore, it becomes very difficult to take care of. So our proposal was to, in a way, create buildings of smaller footprint and higher in elevation, so that people can still have nice views. You are in neighborhood with lesser people, so you have better possibilities to create a community of people sharing the same buildings. And of course, the most obvious thing was that these neighborhoods, these kind of concept neighborhoods, are becoming areas where you can have both townhouses of 2 stories high, but also go up to mixed-use buildings that are 15 or 20 stories high, and they can house shops and offices and apartments if they need to. The center point is dedicated, of the intersection around the metro station, is dedicated to commercial functions, and in a way there is a kind of a plan to give incentives to both the residents but also the developers to be able to work together and develop these new pieces of city. So each one of these buildings have different characters. A central square is dedicated to public use and to the residents. These can be skating parks, these can be gardens, these can be places where people can use for barbecue in the summer. But at the same time, the urban block, the square urban block that somebody can see in Barcelona, begins now to break and to open up, so all the spaces between the buildings become more walkable. There is a definition proposed so that the gardens become both public but also private, meaning owned and taken care of by the residents of the building, so that the urban landscape becomes a little bit more organized. And here is another project that we developed for the city of Novorossiysk. This is the Admiral Serebriagov embankment in the Black Sea. As you know, Novorossiysk is an industrial port, and we were invited there to basically offer a phased master plan, a solution where, first of all, the city could extend, but also it could transform into a MICE type tourist attraction. There is a lot of oil and gas companies working in the area. And what was important for the investor and also the city themselves was to create a project that could be developed in stages. And of course, projects that are developed in stages are a bit of a nightmare for architects, because sometimes you see buildings that are just literally chopped off in half and you're waiting for the next phase to start. So in this case, we made this problem into an opportunity. We broke the phase down into 9 different buildings, starting from an anchor building at the very beginning, which consists of a mixed use agglomeration of a business hotel and a family hotel, a convention center, and a cinema. So we are able to provide a new facility, a new service, both for the local residents, but also for the incoming business tourism that would come there. We are proposing the development of a series of marinas, of little docking stations, both for private yachts, but also for fishing boats that exist in the area. And of course, the buildings gradually go down into different heights. So when we start with the kind of the tourist attraction in the beginning, we also go down very low toward the end, where we develop the end of the site into a botanical garden, where we want to collect seeds from plants of the area to store them in a safe place, and also make a kind of a gardening pavilion for people who enjoy more the kind of ecological arts. The next project that we are working on in Russia is a competition we recently won together with 3 other companies for Rublevo Arkhangelsko area. This represents a kind of a proposal to develop a city over 25 or 30 years. This is meant to be a satellite city, a new heartbeat outside the center of Moscow. We know Moscow is a city that is challenged by traffic problems. And of course, what we propose to the client here is that the architectural future and definition of this city is not so important. We, in fact, proposed 2 different solutions for them here within the time that we had available. But we are proposing an urban how can I say, an urban master plan, a master plan that consists of buildings of mixed use, where people can connect with sky bridges from one building to the other, where you can have shops and also residential units and sky gardens on top of these buildings, and creating a new kind of typology for 21st century living. We are also exploring the ideas of the residential spaces here, more than the business district, where the buildings are shorter, with more glass, in some cases with balconies, and of course opening up to a lake that can be kind of programmed with swimming pool or recreational activities, so that people who live there can also work in this territory without having to go back and forth 2 hours in their car every day from the center of Moscow and back. So the idea of the smart city is that we come closer to the environment, we recognize the realities of today's business and how we work, but also at the same time try to shorten those wasted times that we spend in the car, the fuel consumption, the pollution, and also trying to make spaces livable close to the place of work as a means of being smart about how we operate and live our lives. So the point is, we are engaged and we are being asked to develop solutions in in different aspects of architectural discipline. And one of these, let's say, aspects is our engagement with cultural buildings, which is the second part of what I would like to speak about today. I would like to start with this on the occasion of the Philharmonic Hall that everybody in the room has in mind. I hear that there's been a bit of controversy and so on, but what I would like to concentrate on is what are cultural spaces, what are the spaces where, like today, we're sitting in, there is what, about 400 people in this room, maybe more, and we are all interacting currently. There is usually somebody on stage, and I think this arrangement of the theater and the presentation is something that humans developed from a long time ago. This is the ancient theater of Epidaurus in Greece that was built in the 4th century before Christ, and it holds about 17,000 people. And what you all probably know about it is that when you drop a coin on the floor in that middle circle, you can hear it all the way up to the very top. Without the speakers and the microphones, you can whisper and somebody at the very end can hear you. And why is this happening? It's happening because there is a scientific already understanding of how sound moves in waves, in spheres. And this idea of sound and light we find fascinating. We find fascinating because it has something to do with the way we communicate, with the way we create words, with the way we create designs and theatrical performances, etc. In the course of history, and especially in the Renaissance times, projects like these become then more interesting because the idea of theater and the performance in the Renaissance world becomes part of that social obligation, let's say, where you go to the theater because it has something to do with the cultural scene, it has something to do with this kind of theater of everyday life, but also in these spaces. This is the Golden Hall in the Wiener Musikvere, which in a way it appears like a palace. It has a huge organ in the back, but it's actually an acoustical space converted into a sort of palace, both for impression but also for performance. And slowly, these kinds of luxury, elitist, let's say, decorations begin to fall off. And in the 1950s, after the end of World War II, for the Festival of London, the Philharmonic in London goes into this building here, which is the Royal Festival Hall. It's on the bank of the Thames River, and you can see it's a much more modernist, much more somber type of building. Again, the organ in the back, the place of the orchestra, and what it's characterized here, and this is rather important for the, let's say, the evolution of Philharmonic halls in architectural history, because it is a shoebox in a way. It's a square plan, and it has a kind of an inclined stepping roof. So a shoebox is similar to the type of building that we are in right now. Of course, the wavy ceiling to propagate acoustics and so on, and some balconies for VIPs and guests that essentially function as a kind of a place to be closer to the orchestra and the Philharmonic as you come in. Radical new step by Hans Scharoun in Berlin in 1963, when the Berlin Philharmonic moves into its new building. And the Germans here are up to something rather interesting, because for the first time, this auditorium became this kind of vineyard typology, which is developed in plates. So not everybody sits in the same space like you are now, but actually there is territories, there is little balconies on top of each other, and this kind of landscape of balconies creates a much closer connection to the actual orchestra that's playing in the middle. And that creates a new space, a more democratic space, a space where the performer and the public come closer together, like almost like a Brecht theater where the actors are running in the middle, but the whole thing becomes one. So there isn't that separation so much anymore between performer and spectator. Of course, this is something that we all learned a lot from, and these spaces are actually quite unique, both in their architectural innovation, but also in terms of their acoustic performance. And musicians like these spaces quite a lot. So from 1963 until today, we're 50 years later, roughly, and sometime about 10 years ago, Frank Gehry was invited by Walt Disney Corporation to develop this building, which is sitting in Los Angeles, California, and for all its kind of extravagance and strangeness of form, it's actually a building that, and I don't want to talk on their behalf too much, but it's a project that I admire because of its history, of its making, also of the kind of space it creates, and also, if you like, the kind of the somberness and the humility with which an architect engages this object and actually tries to produce a social space, a space where everybody can participate in this performance. From our point of view, we've also been engaged in cultural and performance centers for quite a while. This is one of our first projects. It was designed in 2009, 2007 actually, and it resembles the eroded rocks in Petra, very near Amman. And basically, it is the agglomeration of two auditoria in the solid parts of the block, and the middle space becomes the public space, the lobby, the new square in the city of Amman. Of course, we are experimenting with the type of auditorium at this time as well, and what kinds of balconies and how to bring the whole performance closer to the stage. Another project that we did finish successfully in this case is the Gwangju Opera House. This is an agglomeration of two rocks with the empty space forming between them. And basically, it is the difference between the main auditorium, a place of opera, Chinese opera in this case, that can hold up to 2,500 people, and the rehearsal halls in the small volume that can hold up to 450 people. This is the interior of the auditorium, a spectacular space that was actually built with a lot of, how can I say, traditional Chinese stage-making technologies, a lot of gypsum, a lot of boarding material, and a lot of golden paint. So it creates both an acoustic but also a visually performative space. So with this, I'm also trying to show that the kinds of buildings that exist around the world, what is that everybody is doing. This is one of the projects that we didn't get to construct in the end. This was the Beethoven Symphony Hall in Bonn, Germany, but I can move on to the Heydar Aliyev Center, which you probably know. Zaha always felt that this was an interesting project because it housed three functions under one roof. This building is a convention hall, it's an auditorium or a theater space, and also a library. So in a sense, it becomes a civic project that can invite different types of user groups inside, whether for educational purposes, children's classes who want to do a workshop about painting, or a tapestry exhibition I've seen recently there that was hosted by the Aliyev Foundation, and also a lot of performances. The reason I'm showing this is because I wanted to point your attention to the fact that the lobby spaces become also great opportunities for us to be able to, for us, I mean as the public, to be able to visit spaces that have this kind of transcendental other reality where you feel like you're taken out of the day-to-day physiology of the city, and you can be part of an environment that is a little bit different. And of course, the auditorium that is quite an interesting design because it's modern on one hand, but in some cases on the stage one can see very traditional kind of dances, becomes an interesting kind of container for those ideas that can be both a testament to kind of traditions, but also more modern, let's say, performances. In fact, when we were building this auditorium, we engaged a workshop in Turkey. There was a guy with his group of 10 or 15 woodworkers, and they cut stripe by stripe this whole kind of piece of wood with which the auditorium was dressed. This is the auditorium's acoustic envelope, but at the same time, you know, the architectural enclosure, and we felt it was a rather successful proposition in the end. We're currently involved in a number of other projects. One of our most important ones is the Grand Theatre in Rabat, in Morocco. Our colleagues are traveling there almost every week now, supervising the construction together with the local architects. This is a building made of concrete and will later on be dressed to this kind of triangulated morphology on the inside. This is also based on a vineyard type of typology, and again the same conditions of trying to be close to the stage were quite important for us. These are some of the drawings we do, both to define the interior skin, but also to examine how each and every person inside this auditorium can have very closed and compressed relationship to the stage, but also good visibility to the whole performance. Another building that is currently happening right now is the Changsha Meishu project, which is a series of 4 buildings connected together, one of which has this kind of auditorium where we're exploring, again, the idea of movement and light within the inside. I can say more about that in a separate lecture. So, as you have seen, most of our interest in these buildings is about capturing what other people do. In a way, architecture can be a background to this process of cultural innovation. And what's important is the guy that's on the piano. It probably took him as long as it takes an architect to write a piece of music. It takes an architect to design and to see a building constructed. But these pieces of music are actually quite important. We all know Beethoven, we all know Mozart, maybe some of us know Yannis Xenakis and others. And the point is that how does architecture engage with this notion of sound? Well, I tried to give you some hints already, but what we do here, and I don't know if we have sound in this, but these are meant to be, can we put the sound on, please? These are sound waves that vibrate to a rhythm, and every time a note is played, you can feel the undulation of this surface. And in fact, for the Yekaterinburg Philharmonic, this was one of our starting points. And the sound as a vibration in space, the thing that you don't see, was actually the formal element, the inspiration that we took in order to be able to look at this space. So what's interesting here is that sound has a form, it has, it occupies space, and And there is, we believe, a relationship between this sound form and the architectural form that needs to be explored more. Of course, radical and revolutionary musicians deal with this kind of issue of the annotation, the way an architect makes a drawing, a musician also can make a drawing. And if you look at on the left-hand side of the screen, how the piano keys can then begin to be activated or programmed on the basis of something like this, it starts becoming interesting. And I studied a lot Yannis Xenakis' drawings on his score, the Metastasis, which when you look at it in an auditorium and you see all the violins and the violas playing, all the sticks are creating, even if you're deaf, you can see this kind of amazing performance of musical instruments on stage. And these are his kind of diagrams, how he drew the music. Of course, he also worked with Le Corbusier. He did the Philips Pavilion, which is very much kind of a thesis on how hyperbolic architectural forms, I'm not showing it here, but how hyperbolic architectural forms become musical annotations and also architectural annotations. Here is another one of his compositions. I like Xenakis because the way he annotates music is very graphic. And you can read things in his scores without necessarily understanding fully what the music is about. And of course, it can get quite messy. The annotation can become an instrument of language itself. And I think this language is interesting and important, especially I would like to hint in this day and age that translation between two different codes and languages becomes an important skill to be able to attain, because you can have one system that speaks this language, you can have another system that speaks this language, but actually there are places of interpretation and connection that can be made, because essentially they can be speaking about the same or very similar things. I brought some slides about Philharmonic Project that we proposed here, and of course I will go through it very quickly because I don't think I have a lot of time. But basically, what we're looking for here is to create a state-of-the-art facility that is very functional. We are looking at the building roof as a means to be able to create a new urban plaza in Yekaterinburg, and also to be able to connect the existing buildings, the existing Philharmonic, together with the new facility. The existing building, which has an incredible history to it, holds about 600, if I'm not mistaken, guests. So it's a medium-sized facility that's neither small enough for a jazz or a piano recital, and it's not big enough to hold a proper orchestral piece with an orchestra of 120 people, for example. So what the client wanted in producing this competition was to expand the capacity of this institution and bring it to a level where it can compete on the international stage, I suppose. Our studies initially were all about letting the existing, the old building be the front and the face of this new assembly. And although we have a big program to fit within this site, it was also quite important to give the front stage and the protagonistic role to the Philharmonic. So although this building is very performative and very high-tech, if you like, it's also a building that sets itself and develops itself in the back. So whether the entrance of the Karl Liebknecht Street or the Pervomaiskaya access are working in the same way. Very kind of a genuine idea to use the void as the presence, to use the void as a way to bring people inside the building, but at the same time respecting and renovating the facades of the existing building and allowing the visitor to be able to experience that old building all the time. So the way of entering this building is interesting, is important, because one can see from one side of the building to the other. So moving and cutting through, it's a kind of a shortcut around the building that connects the two streets, but also gives an idea where the main auditorium is, and a very kind of simple transition up to the level. One of our initial sketches shows how the auditorium, the form of the auditorium becomes a canopy, a wing, if you like, that is there to protect people from the elements and the weather. The auditorium, the main auditorium, is inside. It's on a kind of a first and a second and a third level around inside this enclosure, inside this bubble, if you like. The entrance to the main, one of the entrances to the main auditorium, and in the back you can also see the entrance to the small auditorium. The space in between these two auditoria is a public space. It's meant to be a space where you can have the occasional music event, maybe a school band, or maybe a small group of local musicians can use the space to make a performance. There is a restaurant, there is a bar, there is this idea of a public square, an enclosed public square that is to be used for people. So this is the kind of the see-through view, and of course these are rather initial drawings, but this kind of see-through view, and of course the possibility to walk through the space going from one side of the street to the other. Another view of the lobby. And here some diagrams that show how the two auditoria are sitting in the back of the existing hall. The topography, the terrain of the building moving up and connecting the two sides, and also the Wiener garden in the back. Now moving up inside the building, we can see the two auditoria, their acoustic envelope, and of course the auditorium space itself. We've taken enough care, and we have been very interested in this idea of bringing all these people together, and this is one of our key drivers here, to make an auditorium that is as small and as acoustically performative as it can be. We want this to be a space where the orchestra can enjoy playing music in there, to be in touch with people, and also using the surface, the enclosure, as a kind of an acoustically treated material and form that can absorb and control the reverberations of that are produced by the music in these spaces. So I'd like to believe that it's going to be a rather warm auditorium. It's meant to be clad in wood and also have treatment on the walls exactly for acoustical purposes. In some cases, these buildings are interesting because you have to treat them like the interior of a musical instrument, like a guitar or a violin. If you've ever seen what the inside of these instruments look like, this is the kind of space where the sound gets kind of generated and produced. And actually, in this case, this is something that we can think about in this way. So the small auditorium towards the back, toward the east side of the building, has a special feature because it has a big window that opens the whole performance space up into the Wiener garden. So whether it's winter, when the garden is all full of snow, or in the summer where you can see the water features and the trees blooming and people moving about, while at the same time being in this acoustic capsule where you can hear the most amazing sound. But I believe that the connection between the inside and the outside, and especially also when you can think that people from walking outside can witness the performance inside while it's going on, I think it's an important aspect of this building. We've done 2 concepts for this small auditorium. We weren't exactly sure yet how it should be treated architecturally. Of course, there is a lot of work that still needs to go into these spaces to get them perfectly right, but we hope to be given the chance to develop these further. We're looking at materials where we try to make a connection between the traditional lead roofs that we see on a lot of buildings here in Russia, which is a simple system, and then for the top surface, and then for the inside surface to find something that feels a little bit more like copper or bronze, maybe some wood textures to be able to get a sense of warmth and maybe some reflection. So coming inside the building, the foyer, the Cloak Room that is right in front of the entrance, the back of house spaces in the back are easily accessible from the lobby, but also from a back corridor, information and ticket desks, and of course the stepped landscape of the lobby that creates different spaces inside this public building. Moving up, coming to the first level, the concourse level of the grand concert hall. The second level, which is the balconies, and the third level, which is the higher tier of balconies, together with the bar, toilets, storage spaces, and so on. And of course, we wanted to introduce a balcony for outdoor activities, maybe a cocktail or a kind of a smoking break, where people can also oversee the church that is very nearby. So the auditorium as a kind of a vineyard typology, bringing both the orchestra and the public together in one space is an important attempt here, because I think the Philharmonic here, the Ural Philharmonic Orchestra, is one of the things that this region and this city is known for. And I think the people of the Philharmonic, Alexander Kolodursky, whom I've had the pleasure to meet recently and I spent a lot of time talking to, but I think also his whole team are very much proud of their achievements. They work very hard, and maybe they deserve a kind of a state-of-the-art, world-class house to be able to honor the attempts of all these people and the musicians that play there. So some of our initial studies, Alessio Constantino is here with me, is our project architect, has been working on this project for the last 6 months, and has been also key leading the team to be able to develop all the technical documentation and making sure that everything works right, starting from the visual angles and the visibility and the compression, the distances between stage and balconies. We worked with a series of internationally acclaimed specialists in the acoustic field, in the field of theaters, to be able to get legitimate and accountable advice on how to make these designs. This is some of the work that our team has done, testing, already beginning to simulate how the acoustic interior of this concert hall can be developed as an eardrum, as a kind of a musical instrument where these performances will take part. And we're looking into everything, including what the ceiling looks like, how the light comes in, where people are sat, what they see exactly, etc., so that it becomes a very well designed and engineered kind of space. So remember this project I showed you in the beginning that, that was designed for Amman? We picked up these drawings because we wanted to show how far these kind of studies can go, also on a technical level, to be able to make sure that these spaces are designed properly. And of course, there is people and specialists together with us who control everything from the way the ceiling is formed and how it reflects sound in the different areas of the space, looking how we started on the top left-hand corner and how we ended up with when we harmonized and directed all the sound rays in the right way and in an orderly manner so that everything works well. Looking at temperature inside the space so that one feels comfortable sitting in a performance for 1 or 2 hours. The way the airflow works usually. And you can hear the machines now playing, right? It's not a very good acoustic space, this one, because you can always hear this whizzing sound in the background. And actually, can you imagine a Nick Cave piece playing and he stops for 5 seconds and suddenly instead of hearing silence, you hear the machine playing? It would be a disaster, so we don't want that. What we want is machines that are totally silent so that when there is meant to be silence in the space, there is silence in the space. And yeah, the materiality, we spoke about the wood, I spoke about the window that opens up this space. It is a public space. It's a space of the city, so the city should be able to see in as much as this eye can see out towards it. And of course, this is all in the spirit of bringing things together. Here are some diagrams, initial diagrams of the small recital hall. This is a space with, what is it, 400 people capacity. And we're still working on finding, as I said, the right solution for this. Of course, we hope, one architect would hope that when the design is developed enough, we will build a little prototype room, maybe in a scale of 1 to 10, and the conductor of the orchestra can go inside and listen to what this space is going to be before it even gets built, so that we can be sure that, that the orchestra is happy with this. So some of our drawings investigating here those reflector panels and how they can be placed. These are all initial studies. This is the kind of stuff that we are looking at before we produce images to convey what the spaces are looking like. And of course, here we're trying to increase also the visual impact of the space without increasing the number of seats, increasing the acoustic reflectivity, and so on. The garden in the back, which is an important piece of public space. We know that, and what we wanted to do was to reinvigorate it with additional trees that grow in the region. We also wanted to design it a little bit so it becomes a plaza and a place where people can sit in the winter and the summer, introduce proper lighting, an amphitheater, maybe some water features and lights for feature lights for the summer and for special occasions, Christmas, New Year's, and so on. The structure of the building, we do engage structural engineers from the very beginning to be able to see how these kind of spaces can be constructed in a kind of a commonsensical way. We know that there is a lot of steel produced in the area, and the steel industry in Russia is very advanced. So we want to take advantage of this expertise to be able to create a series of long-spanning trusses. It's important that the space below the building is kept free, so the trusses need to be deeper, but that's where we can also hide all the mechanical equipment and, of course, also the acoustical spaces. We look into more detail how the balcony can work, and of course the reverberation or the vibration, if you like, on the balcony, which when people are coming in or when they are sitting is also quite important to control. The skin, I don't want to get into too much into it. We made some initial propositions, but I think it's an aspect that needs to be thought of and developed a lot more. We're looking at the rain screen type of roof at the moment. We know about cleaning issues, snow loads, and all the rest of it, and I think it needs about maybe 6 to 8 months work before these issues can be resolved. But this is our initial proposition, to use simple metallic panels to be able to clad this building. The facade, we chose to propose a facade that is made of glass, so that on the ground floor the building feels very transparent and very welcoming, and you can see from inside out and from outside in. So the idea, this reinforces the idea of the lobby becoming a kind of a public space, a public square, if you like. And at the same time, we eventually could specify these pieces of glass to have the right thermal insulation values so that they can perform properly and they can allow the space to remain heated without excessive consumption of energy. These are some of the initial studies that we're doing here. It shows the 2 layers of facade at the places of entry, and also how we can take the glass all the way up, shading systems perhaps for days when we have glare and so on. Can we put the sound up, please? You got it? It would be nice if we can have sound. If not, then maybe we can play. It's not working. Okay. Well, it's a more visual presentation, so maybe we can look at it like this, and I can give a little bit of narration, starting from the idea of the sound waves. And using this roof as a way to agglomerate a cluster of buildings, the form of the roof and the underside of the auditoria, part of the Can I go? Just let it play, it's fine. It's okay. Okay, and that's me for today. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. Okay, lunchtime. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Can I get a couple of minutes of
Hi.
your time? How many is on?